Welcome back, everyone. Imagine a group of chronic liars, so vile that when one of their favorite claims is debunked, they respond with something even more ridiculous, that's even easier to debunk. Such is the brief history of the Muslim apologetic claim of perfect Quran preservation. In this video, we're going to take a more honest look at what Muslims are now affirming. Let's start by looking at a couple reasons the perfect preservation claim is so important. Muslim apologists frequently define and defend Islam by saying what it is not, compared to Christianity. Any perceived weakness in Christianity is therefore construed as the best thing ever in Islam. So if Christianity has three gods, Islam is the purest monotheism ever, stone-kissing, pagan, Kaaba, and all the rest. If the biblical prophets sinned, well then the prophets in the Islamic tradition were as clean as the driven snow. If the Bible's been corrupted, then the Quran has been, yeah, you guessed it, miraculously preserved, and on it goes. It's so odd to hear these constant defenses of Islam primarily in relation to something else, as if it has no merit on its own, and only appears to have merit when compared to distorted Islamic views of other religions. Here's a great example of how this typically goes from this son of the father of lies.
What more evidence do you need to prove to them that this Quran is preserved, other than there are no other copies? Look at the Bible. How many versions of the Bible do you have? Or do they have? Hundreds and thousands. Revised Standard Version, New Revised Standard Version, King James Version, the Dewey Version, the this and that. Hundreds and thousands of different versions that they update, change certain words according to their liking every couple of years. Quran is one. You go to Indonesia, all the way back to America, passing by Morocco, Syria, Saudi Arabia, it's the same Quran.
Hundreds, thousands of versions? I detect a rather foul mixture of ignorance and hyperbole. Regardless, change thousands of versions to thousands of virgins, and Muslim men would have no problem at all. Oh yes, and tell us again how many Qurans there are.
Quran is one.
But of course we know there are many different Qurans, yet they are still somehow one. The second reason the perfect preservation myth will persist is that Muslim apologists have made the perfect preservation claim foundational in the Muslim world. Therefore, Muslim apologists must maintain their own lies. Like any good politician or Muslim apologist will tell you, when you get caught in lies, keep lying. For these two reasons, the perfect preservation claims will continue, though they'll have to continue to change as these claims are criticized. Let's look at some modifications that have been made in recent years, starting with the original claim, which is simple enough.
The Quran has been preserved, we believe, since the time of the Prophet till now, word for word, letter for letter, haraka or vowel sign for vowel sign.
So this original claim that we've all heard, repeated enough to induce vomiting, goes something like, the Quran has been perfectly preserved from the time of Muhammad, word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot. We all know the claim, and we all know what happened after. One of Islam's biggest enemies, truth, began circulating in the Muslim world. Rumors of different readings, whispers of variants, murmurs of manuscript changes. Alas, these were not just rumors. They turned out to be cold, hard facts. And so the claim of the perfectly preserved Quran expanded and adapted. Here's one example, which shows a whole bunch of different readings on a chart. By the way, I have to add that some in the comment section of this channel have noted that this chart looks strikingly like the Pride Progress flag. But all that aside, you have a whole bunch of different Quran readings on a chart, and these Muslims are claiming that all these variations in them are word for word preserved.
The Quran has been preserved to the letter, to the dot, and to the sound when we talk about this. Every qira'ah is preserved like this. Every reading is preserved like this.
So Muslims began acknowledging different readings while still claiming perfect word-for-word preservation. However, having found overwhelmingly good reasons to, by default, doubt claims of Muslim apologists, it's necessary to pause and consider what exactly is being affirmed. So let's briefly examine the original claim piece by piece, starting with the first two words, the Quran. Why should we still say the Quran? Because there's only one, of course. Here's one of my favorite clips on all of YouTube.
Quran that we read is exactly the one that was given to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Word for word, letter by letter, surah by surah.
And here's another donkey telling us how many Qurans there are.
Quran is one. You go to Indonesia, all the way back to America, passing by Morocco, Syria, Saudi Arabia, it's the same Quran.
But in reality, there are different Qurans.
In other words, if you were to compare two printed Qurans, you're going to see differences between them. And this is something that many people are unaware of and many people have heard but are not fully familiar with, especially those who have been exposed to some of our brothers who live in Algeria or Morocco or other North African countries. They recite the Quran in a slightly different way. Not just a voice or not just a speaking style, but also changes in letters and words and harakat.
Listening to these back-to-back can be kind of fun.
Quran is one. You go to Indonesia, all the way back to America, passing by Morocco, Syria, Saudi Arabia, it's the same Quran.
Especially those who have been exposed to some of our brothers who live in Algeria or Morocco or other North African countries, they recite the Quran in a slightly different way. Changes in letters and words and harakat.
So the Quran in, say, Morocco, it's the same as everywhere else, right?
Quran is one. It's the same Quran.
No, wait. It's different.
Changes in letters and words and harakat.
No. It has to be the same.
Quran is one.
It couldn't be different, could it?
Passing by Morocco.
Some of our brothers who live in Algeria or Morocco.
Anyway, with Muslims now widely acknowledging differences in the Quran, it's hard to see how the Quran is an accurate description. We're not even talking about one Quran as if there's a text-critical edition that attempts to reconstruct the original. If modern Arabic Qurans are different, and they are, then we should properly speak of Qurans, plural. To still speak of the Quran is simply misleading and only serves as superficial comfort to Muslims who have placed their faith in miraculous preservation. Also, as long as Muslims continue the bizarre assertion that multiple Bible translations are a problem,
look at the Bible. How many versions of the Bible do you have?
then non-Muslims can refer to a plurality of Qurans. That's much more coherent and accurate than the assertion that multiple versions of the Bible are somehow problematic or evidence of corruption, which is certainly one of the more bafflingly stupid claims that Muslim apologists love to parrot. And so we revise the claim in light of what Muslims are now admitting. Muslims are actually claiming that the Qurans have been perfectly preserved from the time of Muhammad, and so forth. But now that we're no longer talking about the Quran, but the Qurans, this makes us ask, which Qurans have been perfectly preserved? Here's one way to answer that question. Gabriel Reynolds comments, the idea of a discrete number of different, yet equally canonical qira'at, or readings, did not develop before the 4th or 10th century, when great divisions over the Quranic text led Ibn Mujahid, among others, to sponsor this regulatory concept. Ibn Mujahid argued that there are 7 equally valid readings. Others argued for 10 or 14. The gradual, yet never complete, acceptance of the argument for 7 readings was generally accompanied with a caveat that each reading has 2 versions. Effectively, then, 14 different versions were considered equally authentic, only one of which was Hafs an Azam. Even in this scenario, there's no unanimity over the precise shape of Hafs an Azam qira'ah. 4 different lines of transmission are claimed for it, and discrepancies abound in the various texts claiming to transmit it. Centuries after Muhammad, variants in the perfectly preserved Qurans multiplied exponentially. Muslim authorities had to intervene, help Allah guard the Quran from corruption, and limit the differences. Eventually, 7 eponymous readers were selected, with 2 versions each. So Azam's version, for example, was taken from 2 of his students, Hafs and Shuba. I shouldn't have to say this, but miraculous preservation was not one of the criteria for canonization. So let's revise the Muslim claim accordingly. The actual claim is that the 7, 10, or 14 canonical versions of the Qurans have been selected by various Muslim scholars from dozens of variant readings that multiplied over centuries. Now let's examine the second part. These have all been perfectly preserved from the time of Muhammad, word for word, letter for letter, blah, blah, blah. Again, perfect preservation was not a factor in the canonization process. That's a later Muslim apologetic claim. Therefore, in what would appear to be a shocking coincidence, earlier Muslim scholars, using other criteria, canonized only these specific readings, which would later be recognized by Muslim apologists as perfectly preserved. This illustration from Professor Shadi Nasser's work shows the lines of transmission from Azam, one of the most well-known eponymous readers, to Ibn Mujahid, who famously selected 7 readings. As we said earlier, each eponymous reader had 2 students whose readings were generally accepted, for a total of 14. In this case, again, that's Hafs and Shuba. But as we see from Nasser's diagram, there are different lines of transmission from these students, and as we heard from Professor Reynolds earlier, discrepancies between them abound. Remember, this is an illustration only for one eponymous reader. There are more eponymous readers, students, and lines of transmission. And out of all of these variants in the history of the Qurans, Muslims want us to believe that some of them have been perfectly preserved, and that the perfectly preserved versions were selected for canonization independently by other criteria by scholars centuries earlier who believed at least some of the variants, ironically, were the result of human error. It's hilarious and stupid at the same time. Let's revise the original claim yet again. The 7, 10, or 14 canonical versions of the Qurans have been selected by various Muslim scholars from dozens of variant readings that multiplied over centuries. These have all been transmitted from the time of Muhammad with various discrepancies between the eponymous readers, their students, and their students after them. But we must examine one further detail of our revised claim in this brief analysis. How certain can Muslims be that these readings were transmitted from Muhammad? At this point, claims of Muslim apologists reach new heights of stupidity. They will frequently claim that all of the readings and all of these different variants that are canonical go back ultimately to Muhammad. How things have changed. Early Muslim scholars did not look at the variant readings of the Quran as divine revelation. They attributed the Quran variants to human origins, either to the reader's independent reasoning in interpreting the consonantal outline of the Quran, or simply to an error in transmission. This position changed drastically in the later periods, especially after the 11th century, where the canonical readings started to be treated as divine revelation. Every single variant reading in the 7 and 10 eponymous readings was revealed by God to Muhammad. But can Muslims claim that these readings go back to Muhammad? Well, no, not according to some Muslim scholars when applying the most rigorous criteria for authentic transmission. For example, al-Zarkashi says that some late scholars have claimed that the 7 readings are transmitted through tawatur, the most secure form of transmission, only among the generations of readers and transmitters between the eponymous readers and their students. However, tawatur cannot be verified among the generations between the Prophet and the eponymous readers. The isnads of all the eponymous readers down to the Prophet are single chains of transmission, where the conditions of tawatur cannot be established with such isnads. To be clear about what this means, let's return to Professor Nasser's diagram. He's saying that while scholars later claimed the most secure method of transmission of the various Qurans from the time of Muhammad, tawatur cannot be verified among the generations between Muhammad and the eponymous readers. That means tawatur cannot be verified chronologically before Azam, in this case only after, and of course the same for the other eponymous readers, Nafi, Ibn Kathir, and so forth. Muslim scholars have therefore admitted that they cannot claim tawatur from Muhammad through the eponymous readers, through their students, into the present day. So what is the cure for this? Al-Zakashi's answer to this dilemma is to argue that the Ummah has unanimously accepted these eponymous readings, chosen them to represent the Mus'haf, and confirmed their Quranic nature. Consensus has played such an important part in the Qurans that Muslims read today. Let's compare these claims one last time. The Quran has been perfectly preserved from the time of Muhammad, word for word, letter for letter, dot for dot. That's the original claim. What's actually being claimed is that the 7, 10, or 14 canonical versions of the Qurans have been selected by various Muslim scholars from dozens of variant readings that multiplied over centuries. These Qurans have not been transmitted from Muhammad through Tawatur, and various discrepancies exist between the eponymous readers, their students, and their students after them. Much more could have been said about these things, but that's not necessary right now because there will be plenty of opportunity. For the reasons given at the beginning of this video, present generations of Muslim apologists will continue with their evolving perfect preservation claims while redefining perfect preservation into a meaningless slogan that serves as nothing more than a panacea for the Muslim masses that they have so long deceived. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.